Yevgeny Prigozhin, he is the head of the Wagner Group. That's a private army of Russian mercenaries and ex-cons. They staged a coup against Vladimir Putin's military leaders last Friday, seizing government buildings and then deciding to call it all off. He is now reportedly in Belarus, a country bordering both Ukraine and Russia. Belarus has cooperated with the Russian military during the invasion of Ukraine. Alexander Lukashenko is the president of Belarus, and many consider him one of Putin's toadies. But Lukashenko is reportedly telling people that Vladimir Putin instructed him to kill Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group. He said, kill him the second he sets foot on Belarusian soil. Lukashenko reportedly told Putin he wouldn't do it, but then Lukashenko called Prigozhin, he's the head of the Wagner Group. Lukashenko warned him that Putin intends to, quote, squash you like a bug. That being said, Putin did have to negotiate his way out of this mutiny, giving Prigozhin and the Wagner Group safe passage to Belarus, and the Russian government has agreed to drop all charges against Prigozhin. Kremlin watchers say it's too soon to say how tentative a grip Vladimir Putin now has over his own military. But the consensus seems to be that Friday's mutiny has severely weakened Putin, and this probably heralds the beginning of the end of his more than two-decade rule over Russia. The New York Times reports this morning that there are reports that Prigozhin, he's the head of the Wagner Group, think Eric Prince from Blackwater, but Prigozhin's probably more fun at parties. There are now reports that Prigozhin led the mutiny with an understanding that several disgruntled Russian generals would support him. One of those generals might have been General Sergei Surovikin. He's seen here with Putin in 2017. U.S. intelligence officials are telling the New York Times that General Surovikin was Russia's top commander in Ukraine until he was replaced in January of this year. The New York Times says intelligence agencies here in the United States are attempting to determine whether or not General Surovikin might have assisted the Wagner Group in drawing up the plans for Friday's 36-hour mutiny. The New York Times says American officials are saying that the Wagner Group would have never launched the attack on Putin's military had they not been given assurances from high-ranking Russian generals that they would support such a move. The Congress, back in 1978, signed the Inspector General report. I'm having a technical problem here. There we go. Did I do it right? Okay. In 1978, Congress signed the Inspector General Act of 1978, which has resulted in approximately 74 inspector generals spread out across the federal government, and they serve as independent watchdogs over federal agencies, like the Army or the Justice Department. Much like the Congressional Budget Office or the General Accounting Office, inspector generals have a reputation for rising above partisan politics, and often their word is either final or close to final. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some Inspector General reports that came out on Tuesday. First off, we could talk about COVID. During Donald Trump's final year, if you remember, COVID struck, and Congress, under his leadership, passed the CARES Act, which set aside close to $1 trillion, more than $1 trillion, in small business loans that could be paid back, or if you don't want to pay them back, you didn't have to. The loans were administered by the Small Business Administration, and the Small Business Administration has an inspector general. And the inspector general for the Small Business Administration issued a report on Tuesday saying that after all is said and done, the Small Business Administration dispersed a total of $1.2 trillion in COVID relief to small businesses. And of that, 17%, $200 billion, was squandered due to fraud, waste, and other trickery. You mean that the Trump administration dispersed $1.2 trillion to small businesses and $200 billion of that got squandered? I find that shocking. Waste, fraud, and trickery in the Trump administration during COVID? I don't trust this inspector general. Well, the Justice Department also has an inspector general, and the inspector general for the Justice Department delivered a report Tuesday on the death of sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein while he was in federal custody awaiting trial. Epstein was found dead, if you remember, inside his Metropolitan Correctional Center jail cell in Manhattan. That's a federal prison. And the inspector general for the Department of Justice concludes that Epstein was not killed, that he died from a suicide. But the inspector general says in its 114-page report that the Federal Bureau of Prisons was sloppy and negligent and failed to keep an eye on Epstein, who they knew might try to take his own life. Epstein's brother called this report BS and insisted that Epstein was murdered. Chicago and Detroit are under a thick blanket of smoke that has drifted in from Canada's wildfires that continue to rage. Officials say Chicago and Detroit air quality is the worst in the world. The worst in the world. As of Tuesday night, 92 million Americans are living under an air quality advisory. This is from Canada's wildfires, which are turning out to be Canada's worst wildfire season ever. There are 490 separate wildfires spreading from Quebec to British Columbia, sending soot and smoke into the air. These particulates are carcinogenic. You should not be breathing them. The wildfires are the result of fossil fuels being burnt, creating greenhouse gases that trap the heat, causing the planet's temperature to rise, resulting in hotter and drier summers, and that serves as an accelerant for massive wildfires. These wildfires are the fault of Exxon Mobil, Chevron, Shell, and British Petroleum. These fires will continue until those companies are put out of business. You cannot have both. You cannot have a planet that is habitable for our children and at the same time have companies like Exxon Mobil, Chevron, Shell, and British Petroleum. The fossil fuel industry and the future of our children can't coexist. It's one or the other. And the American government has chosen fossil fuels. Well, in the final days of the Trump administration, Trump brought in several outside lawyers who talked him into this extreme legal theory that the Constitution granted state legislatures the power to conduct federal elections with no oversight from the state governor or the state Supreme Court. Now, the Constitution has what is called an elections clause, and because it's vaguely worded, it specifies that state legislatures determine how the elections are conducted. it was an oversight. Instead of adding the words the state governor and the state Supreme Court, it just says state legislatures determine how elections are conducted in individual states. So far-right crackpots came up with what is called the independent state legislature theory, which means, for example, that Trump could lose a state like Pennsylvania, which he did, but because the legislature at the time was controlled by Republicans, they could vote, they could decide that there was voter fraud, and the state legislature, with no supervision from the Democratic governor or the democratically controlled Supreme Court, the state legislature could vote to send their own electors to Washington, D.C., and ignore the will of the people, claiming voter fraud. At the time, as an example, both the Pennsylvania Senate and the Pennsylvania State House were controlled by the Republican Party. There was a Democratic governor, and the Supreme Court was primarily Democratic. But with the independent state legislature theory, this crackpot theory, they maintain that the elections clause of the Constitution specifies that only the legislative branch of each state gets to set election laws for that state. And like I said, Trump was trying to work the Republican state houses that were controlled by Republicans to have them send Trump electors instead of Biden electors to Washington. It's a little complicated. It's what Trump dreamed up, that state legislatures could choose any electors they want to send to Washington to determine who is president. And the Supreme Court on Tuesday, in a 6-3 ruling, said the independent state legislature theory is bogus and that state election laws involve all three branches of state government, not just the legislative branch. One of the architects of this theory, the state legislature theory, is John Eastman, who wrote several memos to Donald Trump outlining why Mike Pence had the constitutional authority to declare Donald Trump the winner on January 6. Remember, Donald Trump was convinced by this guy, John Eastman, that Mike Pence had the constitutional authority on January 6, when counting the votes. He could just ignore what he counted and just declare Donald Trump unilaterally the president, or he could insist there was voter fraud and the Constitution granted Pence the power to demand a delay in the final tally, get like a 10 to 12 day delay after January 6, which Eastman calculated would give Trump more time to figure out how to stay in office. Eastman also promoted the idea that Trump could work the state legislatures to send their own separate electors. This is against the law, sending separate electors. It's something the special counsel, Jack Smith, is looking into. It is criminal to conspire to send separate electors to the Electoral College. Well, as a result, it's not looking good for John Eastman. Last week, the State Bar of California began proceedings looking into stripping him of his law license. The proceedings continue this week and might last through August. It's really hard to disbar a lawyer. I talked about this last week. Giuliani, alcoholic, lost 60 cases challenging the 2020 election, was a complete moron. And all Washington, D.C. and New York can do, those bar associations, all they've done is suspended his license. Obviously, this guy should be stripped of his law license. Lawyers do not like to strip each other of their license. Well, this disbarment hearing for John Eastman is not going well. It's kind of funny. If it isn't sad, it's kind of funny. During the disbarment hearings, Eastman was accused of presenting a truck driver's affidavit in 2020 as evidence of voter fraud. The driver, according to Eastman, when he was challenging the election, and Eastman was presenting this truck driver's affidavit, Eastman said that the truck driver was a witness to vote tampering. But Eastman, during this week's disbarment hearings, revealed, well, I never really vetted the truck driver. I just took his affidavit. And Eastman did not know that the truck driver whose affidavit he took was also a professional ghost hunter. A ghost hunter. He sees things that don't exist, like ghosts and election fraud. Not only that, he had a history of mental illness that included drug abuse and domestic violence. By the way, Eastman served as a law clerk for Clarence Thomas. He's good friends with Ginny Thomas, and Clarence Thomas on Tuesday voted with the minority, hoping to uphold his old clerk, John Eastman's independent state legislature theory. Clarence Thomas. I'll have more on Clarence Thomas tomorrow. If you remember, the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, indicted Donald Trump for, among other things, falsifying business records and violating campaign finance law when Trump arranged for hush payments to Stormy Daniels in the run-up to the 2016 presidential election. That trial is scheduled for March of 2024. Trump's lawyers, however, are trying to slow things down, and they are challenging now Alvin Bragg's jurisdiction. He's the Manhattan DA. Lawyers are saying that the Manhattan DA can't bring Trump to trial because the alleged crimes were committed while Trump was president. Therefore, the trial should be transferred to a federal venue and a federal prosecutor. Now, Trump arranged for Michael Cohen, his personal attorney, to make the payments to Stormy Daniels while Trump was still a candidate. So the initial plotting of the crime was committed in Manhattan, and Trump wasn't yet president. But Trump's lawyers insist that because Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen for the hush money payments when Trump was president in the Oval Office, Trump's lawyers are now insisting this is now a federal crime as opposed to a New York City crime. And there was a 3-hour hearing on Tuesday on whether or not to transfer the jurisdiction. This is what Trump does. He just slows things down. On Tuesday, federal judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, he listened for 3 hours to this nonsense and said, while he's not ready to make a firm ruling quite yet, he says he's leaning towards not transferring the venue of the trial to a federal court and will keep, he says he's probably going to keep it in Manhattan. This is what they do. Delay, delay, delay. So that trial could happen in March of 2024. A lot of trials to keep track of. The Washington Post reports that it took the FBI a year after January 6 to launch an investigation into the role Donald Trump played in instigating the attack on the United States Capitol. The Post says that institutional caution and fear over at the FBI, they were afraid of looking partisan. It resulted in the FBI slow-walking any investigation into the role Donald Trump played in instigating the January 6th insurrection. The Post goes on to write that Attorney General Merrick Garland was aware of the FBI's reticence And so he decided early on to go after the low-hanging fruit, the January 6 rioters. And then after securing their convictions, which he seems to have done, close to 1,000 convictions, he planned at the beginning then to start working his way up the ladder. And he eventually appointed Jack Smith as a special counsel to look into all of Trump's crimes. It's all under one portfolio. Jack Smith, special counsel. He's looking into every crime that Donald Trump may or may not have, he did commit. The Post says the FBI was even reluctant to search Mar-a-Lago last year, even after a warrant was issued to retrieve classified documents that Trump refused to turn over. But the FBI, according to the Post, eventually agreed to search the premises after they noted the highly sensitive material at play. Today, Donald Trump told ABC News that the documents that he was waving in front of two researchers for Mark Meadows' autobiography, he was caught on tape at Bedminster Golf Club showing them classified documents, a war plan drawn up by Mark Milley. On Tuesday, Donald Trump told ABC News, it wasn't a war plan. I was just showing off. It was nothing. It wasn't a war plan. It wasn't classified. It was just my bravado. That's what he said. Meanwhile, Jack Smith, the special counsel, after securing an indictment of Trump in Miami for mishandling classified material, is reportedly expanding his portfolio to investigate Trump's attempts to overturn the election in Georgia. You already have Fani Willis, the Fulton County DA in Georgia, looking into this, and now Jack Smith is making a federal case out of it. You all remember Trump's call to the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, telling him, we just need to find one more vote than Biden has. If you've heard the tape, it's election tampering. Well, there are reports now that Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, is now being interviewed by Jack Smith's office, which suggests the scope of the federal investigation is going to be much wider than Trump anticipated. Ivanka Trump got a bit of good news on Tuesday. What happened there? There we go. Ivanka Trump got a bit of good news on Tuesday when the appellate division of New York's Supreme Court on Tuesday stripped her from State Attorney General Letitia James's civil suit against the Trump Organization. This is a civil suit charging the Trump Organization with defrauding banks, insurance companies, and the IRS. It's really hard to keep track of all these lawsuits. The judge ruled that there was a statute of limitations and that this case, which is scheduled to go to trial in October of this year, this case can only include crimes committed by the Trump Organization after February of 2016. And since Ivanka had already stepped away from the company by then, the statute of limitations dictates that she be stripped from this New York State fraud lawsuit. She also broke ranks with her brothers Eric and Don Jr., who are also on trial. She got her own lawyer. She said, that's okay. I don't need Daddy to hire me a lawyer. Jared will get us one. And it worked. She's not going to be standing trial before the New York State Attorney General. Trump's two sons, Eric and Don Jr., are still named in this case. The State Attorney General of New York is seeking $250 million in damages, and she's asking that Trump be forbidden from ever conducting business in New York State again. Donald Trump's valet, his body man, also has been indicted by Jack Smith. It's in that Miami federal courthouse that he has to be arraigned. He's been accused of mishandling classified documents alongside Donald Trump. Walt Nauta was with Trump 2 weeks ago when the former president was arraigned, and Nauta's arraignment was delayed 2 weeks so he could find counsel. On Tuesday, Nauta had to ask for even more time, saying he can't afford his current lawyer, who at the last minute suddenly jacked up his fees. Nobody wants to handle Walt Nauta, and word is that Donald Trump is going to find it increasingly difficult to find lawyers because he doesn't pay. He doesn't pay, and it's bad for your reputation. Well, Donald Trump lost Michigan in 2020 to Joe Biden. He's done even worse in Oakland County, Michigan, where he not only lost to Biden in 2020, he lost to Hillary Clinton in 2016, even though he beat Hillary statewide. He does not do well in Oakland County, Michigan. Well, people in Oakland County, Michigan don't like him, which is why Republicans of Oakland County, Michigan had no choice this past weekend but to name Donald Trump not just man of the year, but man of the decade. You know how this was negotiated. The Oakland County, Michigan Republican Party held its annual Lincoln Day dinner Saturday night. It was a fundraiser with tickets fetching as much as $7,000 a seat. Donald Trump was invited to speak. He's a big draw in Oakland County, Michigan. Not on election day, but for the idiot Republicans, they want to see him. So how do you entice Donald Trump to come to your fundraiser? Tell him you're naming him Man of the Year. Nope, not good enough. I want Man of the Century. Well, how about Man of the Decade? So he became, he's Oakland County's, Michigan's Man of the Decade. I don't know why everything is screwed up today. And there to open for Donald Trump was local boy who made bad, Ted Nugent, who played the national anthem before Donald Trump took the stage. Now, Ted Nugent is a huge gun rights activist. After Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 Black Lives Matter protesters and injured 1 with his AR-15, Ted immediately called him a hero and invited him on his podcast. Ted believes in guns. He says he was born with a God-given right to carry an AR-15. Consequently, he's a board member of the National Rifle Association. Ted also has a history of racism, sexism, and anti-Semitism. You can't separate gun obsession with racism, sexism, and anti-Semitism. I'll get back to the guns in a second. Let me show you the anti-Semitism, and then we'll get to the racism, and then we'll go back to the guns. Here is a Facebook post where he accused the Jews of being behind gun control, and this is the meme he passed along. It's almost as though Roseanne Barr and Theo Von are writing for him. Look at this. So who is behind gun control? And I mean, it's so grotesque. Can you read this? It's just, I won't even, let's move on. It's just so grotesque. If you can read some of these things, yeah. Ted Nugent. Grotesque. A few years ago, Josh Sugarman from the Violence Policy Center dug up an interview that Ted Nugent gave to the Detroit Free Press about apartheid. Let me read you what Ted Nugent had to say about apartheid. So Josh Sugarman writes that his organization, the Violence Policy Center, has been tracking Nugent's hate-filled rhetoric for years. He says in 1990, for example, Nugent told the Detroit Free Press magazine that apartheid, what is going on here tonight? That apartheid isn't that cut and dry. All men are not created equal, says Ted Nugent. He goes on to say the preponderance of South Africa is a different breed of man. I mean that with no disrespect. Yeah, of course not. I say that with great respect. I love them because I'm one of them. They are still people of the earth, but they are different. They still put bones in their noses. They walk around naked. They wipe their butts with their hands. These are different people. You give them toothpaste and they effing eat it. I use the N-word a lot because I hang out with a lot of N-words, and they use the N-word, and I tend to use words that communicate. That is Ted Cruz. You can't separate the racism, the anti-Semitism, and the sexism without the obsession, from the obsession with guns. Did I mention he loves guns? He loves guns. He thinks everything can be solved with a gun. And yet, when he opened for Donald Trump Saturday night at the Oakland County, Michigan Republican Party fundraiser, everyone had to go through metal detectors. Think about this. When Ted Nugent performs, it's only in front of good guys. It's a room. They're all going through metal detectors.
Oh, we got Exxon over here.
My wife told me about that one.
Yep. When Ted Nugent performs, he loves guns, but when he performs, his entire audience is just good guys without guns. You know why? Because Ted Nugent doesn't need a good guy with a gun. He can handle it. Take away, that's what he's saying, take away everybody's guns. I don't need anybody protecting me. I'm Ted Nugent. I don't need a good guy with a gun. He is so brave. And then after Ted Nugent played the national anthem, I wonder when Ted Nugent, since he's a racist, I wonder when he sings the national anthem, does he add the verses about killing slaves who escaped the plantation? See, this is why we can't teach critical race in Florida, because we can't let our kids know what they're singing. The national anthem was written during the War of 1812, when we were fighting the British. And one of the tactics deployed by our British enemies at the time was to attack southern plantations and enlist the slaves. They would free the slaves and say, come on, fight against America, which many of the slaves did quite successfully. Some of them helped ransack Washington, D.C., which is why the third verse of the Star-Spangled Banner is directed at mercenary soldiers, or hirelings, as they were called back then, and freed slaves. And this is what Francis Scott Key wrote, and this is the third verse. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. That's what the Star-Spangled Banner. This is why Colin Kaepernick took a knee. It's a song that celebrates killing the slaves who were freed. Anyway, Ted finished the national anthem. I doubt he sang the third verse. Ted finished the national anthem And then it was time for Donald Trump to speak before he got to accept his Man of the Decade award. But as always, before he speaks, the former president must first clear his throat. And then Donald Trump launched into attack on Joe Biden. He accused the president of being a religious bigot.
See Biden now, the real Biden on religion. He's not in favor of religion. He can talk all he wants, but what they've done to Catholics and what they've done to evangelicals, what they've done to everybody is a disgrace.
So stupid. He's not in favor of religion. It's like a 4-year... what Biden has done to evangelicals and Catholics is a disgrace. Yes, the bigotry of supporting same-sex marriage and allowing transgender soldiers in our military, the bigotry, he did that not to help the LGBTQ community, but to persecute religious people. Joe Biden is in favor of contraception. That's a slight, that's an insult to religious people. Something Trump would never do. He does not use contraception because he's a devoutly religious man, right? Stormy Daniels says he didn't wear a condom. Did you know that? I don't know if you remember that, but Stormy Daniels says Trump didn't wear a condom when he cheated on Melania, who had just given birth to Barron. That's how deeply religious Donald Trump is. He refuses to wear a condom while he's cheating on his wife because deeply religious people are opposed to contraception. And then Trump wowed the Michigan crowd by summoning the spirit of their favorite son, Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Motors, a world-class America firster. Henry Ford loved Hitler, really did. Horrible anti-Semite, Henry Ford. Here is Donald Trump in Michigan honoring the memory of Michigan's very own Henry Ford by going full bore Hitler. This is full bore Hitler.
This is the final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, Marxists, and fascists. And we will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media, and we will defeat crooked Joe Biden. We will liberate America from these villains once and for all.
Now, look, they say when you bring up Hitler, you've lost the argument. We know that Trump kept a copy of Mein Kampf next to his bed. He is pinching Hitler's speeches. These are lines directly from one of Hitler's Nuremberg rallies. I'm going to play it again. This is what he's using. He's not improvising. He's going word for word off the fascist playbook. Listen to this.
This is the final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, Marxists, and fascists. And we will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media, and we will defeat crooked Joe Biden. We will liberate America from these villains once and for all.
You know, democracies go bad, and they go bad very quickly. And we have half this country teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. We have an eviction crisis. We have a planet that America is heating up. And the people who are responsible for stealing all our money and setting the planet on fire want somebody like this guy. They want a fascist who will be able to handle the climate refugees and restore order in the streets when people are sleeping there. Nobody's going to rise up. This is not accidental. This is a playbook that has been followed by the industrialists for more than a century. Trump just didn't appear magically. There are elements in our country, there always have been, who want fascism. They did polling when Roosevelt was president. And when asked, do you prefer communism to fascism? A vast majority of Americans preferred fascism to communism. And when they were this is when Roosevelt was president. And when Americans were asked if you have to choose between the American system, fascism, or communism, the American system came in first, but fascism wasn't too far behind. It took the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor for everybody to get on board. There is a fascist strain in this country. Donald Trump just didn't materialize. On tomorrow's show, I know he's boring, I'm going to talk about Ron DeSantis because he's trying to out-fascist Donald Trump. And they're both working off the same playbook. Demonize the transgender people, demonize the LGBTQ community, demonize black people, demonize Mexicans and Guatemalans and Hondurans at the border. Starts with them. Who's next? Jews. Then Arabs. Then anybody who isn't a white, heterosexual, Christian man. We're not going to end up like Nazi Germany, but if these guys get control, we will end up with a fascist theocracy. And that will benefit the schizophrenics who truly think Jesus is coming and they're getting ready for the rapture. And, of course, the moneyed class who, yeah, go ahead. Dream about the rapture. Just let me keep setting the planet on fire so we can get wealthier. Trump didn't materialize out of nowhere. And you get rid of Trump, you're not going to get rid of the fascism. There's DeSantis. And behind him is Mike Pence. And I'm telling you, if these legal fees and the legal problems with Trump continue to build and he has a health problem or he just can't run for president, keep your eye on Mike Pence. Chris Christie's there throwing punches, but he's not going to get the nomination. DeSantis is unlikable. He's too on the nose with the fascism. Mike Pence is the one to watch. He's the establishment Republican. He looks and sounds like the establishment Republican, but he's just as much a Republican fascist as Donald Trump, Dick Cheney, George W. Bush, and, of course, Ronald Reagan, who started it all. But there's one Republican I believe in. I'm going to end on a happy note. Let's end on a happy note. Republican presidential candidate Perry Johnson. He's the value millionaire. That's what he calls himself, the value millionaire from Michigan. I played him yesterday. I think I'm going to play him every night. Here he is at the Faith and Freedom Coalition Friday night, winning over the Christians.
By golly, we are the greatest country that ever lived, and let's keep it that way. Hey, 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 let's do it. Let's do it now, because we are going to win this next election. Let's do it.
Yeah, not so easy to do Hitler, is it? He tried. He tried to be Hitler. Couldn't pull it off. Maybe he'll get better as we get closer to the general election. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. If you enjoyed any portion of this show, do me a favor. The best way to help me is by sharing this on social media and with your friends. I can't do it. I can't do this without my listeners promoting me because nobody else will. So if there's anything here that you thought was valuable, please copy and paste the link and share it on social media and in emails or however you do it, Snapchat. I don't know how people share things. I know how I do it. Please like this video. It's embarrassing for me to ask you to do that, but I need you to hit the like button. Please subscribe to this channel. And please subscribe to my newsletter. We're going to be doing office hours this Friday. And I think that covers it. Most importantly, thank you to the moderators in the chat room who keep the conversation intelligent and they get rid of garbage people. We have strict community guidelines here at the David Feldman Show. Garbage people are not welcome. And I cannot tell you the joy I get deleting right-wing comments on these videos. Occasionally they sneak through. Not going to argue with garbage people. There are 100 million people who don't vote. Not going to argue with the garbage people. We've got to win over the 100 million who don't show up at the polls. If you're a garbage person, I'm not interested in anything you have to say. You're stupid. You're a bigot. You're a gun-owning, weak man. And I have no interest in your thoughts. So your comments will be deleted because this is a garbage-free zone. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak.